So I have to tell you, Taylor is originally from?
Denton, Texas.
Where are you now?
Right now I live in Michigan, actually. I live outside of Detroit and work from afar for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
That's great, that's great. So we'd love to have your questions, comments, quick remarks, actors and audience. Thank you all for being here. Anything just right off the bat, Taylor, that's crossing your mind now having, Taylor also directed this. Did you not direct a reading of this?
Oh, no. I was participated in a workshop.
Okay, great.
And just got done working on a production of our translation of Twelfth Night.
Oh, wow.
And then directed a reading of our translation of Midsummer this summer. So
that's great. Oh, that's what you did.
Yes, yeah, Midsummer.
Great. But any thoughts you want to kick us off with?
I just want to shake the Duke so bad. But it's so wonderful to get to hear like the words that Aditi has worked on so hard, mixed in with the words that Shakespeare has written. Thank you guys so much for doing this. It was really fabulous to hear you.
So how long did you, Andrew was one of the dramaturgs who worked on this.
Yes.
Tell us about the pattern for you all in terms of time. How did it?
Yeah, well, we went through a couple of years. One of the things that we did first was we just read the play, got to know the play for months and months and months and months. And then Aditi started working through and doing some translations, and we just kind of go back and forth. I would always let her know when I felt like the translation was different from what the text was saying. And then she would, I think the first draft, which was done maybe a year and a ago, I don't exactly remember, was pretty literal. And then the idea was for the second draft to make it a bit more sort of poetically pleasing. And so this draft was an attempt to do that. So, yeah, for a couple of years. Yeah.
And Andrew teaches here at UT, theater history.
Yep.
That's right. So questions and comments from you all. Anybody willing to kick us off yet?
This question is for Isabel.
Yeah, she's on the spot there.
Especially since this is a show that I was not familiar with. Mm-hmm. So I am quite sure that the look on your face at the end of the original is not how this one was scripted. Because you look like, oh God, no. And I can't imagine Shakespeare writing your part as, oh God, no.
Well, this is a great question. So you answer it, and then Andrew and tell your thoughts.
I mean, I was just told to look out.
This is me. Aditi has nothing in the script. All we know is Isabel has no more lines.
Yeah.
That's what Shakespeare does. He sets this up, and Isabel has no more lines. So you do what you will with it, but
I think it's really hard as a modern woman to not have that feeling inside. But I spoke to Andrew about it, and he told me a little more about just how in general this show is known for a bit of an ambiguous ending, and so maybe it wasn't as ambiguous as it was meant to be.
you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I just think even the, I've dramaturged the show in Shakespeare, and I think they made a very strong play with that Isabel wanted to have nothing to do with the Duke at the end of it. I think, various productions throughout 400 years have played with those moments, and some of them, I know, I think actually very rarely is it like, oh, this huge, wonderful celebration of marriage. It's a really tricky thing to pull off because of the different moves that the Duke makes to keep Claudio's, life a secret until the end. I mean, there's so many things that the Duke does. There's like, I don't know if this guy is the right guy. So I think it gets staged all kinds of different ways and has for a long time.
Anything you want to add?
I think that just why I said I want to shake the Duke so badly. It's just because you get to the end and you're sort of, even before you get to the end, and you're sort of like, stop playing with them.
Yeah.
Stop playing with them. This is their lives. These are real humans. but he's so caught up in his plan and so impressed with himself.
Yeah.
And I think that the ending, however it's played, we can still take that lesson, I think, from saying like, we're supposed to, it's like, oh, this is how it would all be tied up. And it gives us a second to sit in the audience and reflect and think, oh, like, actually, that's not so great. That's not so great for her. And in contrast with Mariana, too, that's another one that you're like, good Lord. that's her future. And so, yeah, it's an
Just like real life.
Yeah, and hearing people talking during intermission, I know that there's a lot of people going, whoa, about the connections to where we are right now, like as a country and as the conversation, and it is startling to see it up on stage, for sure.
Well, she also had gone to comedy. She had made that decision already.
Right.
And all of a sudden, here's this guy that she doesn't really know very well.
That's right.
And he asks her to come. I think it is both true to the setting of the time of Shakespeare and true to today, when all of a sudden the man is going to say, me, the woman, and make me the Duchess. And Me Too says no.
Yeah.
The flyer says you commissioned 2 adaptations. What are the adaptations?
Yeah, so part of the program Play On. So what we did was we commissioned 39 plays to be translated by 36 playwrights in the course of 3 years. So we've been busy for the last 3 years, and part of that was also 2 adaptations that were part of that. The first one was completed quickly, and it was the Q Brothers. Is anyone familiar with the Q Brothers? They do a lot of hip-hop adaptations of Shakespeare. They're very popular in Chicago. They have a version of Othello that played in New York called Othello the Remix that was off Broadway for a while and did very well. They do shows at Chicago Shakespeare Theater a lot. They did an adaptation of Two Gentlemen of Verona and set it in a high school, and it was called Q-Gents. They like to work their name cleverly into the title. So that was the first. I got to see it at the Illinois Shakespeare Festival a few years ago. It's hilarious, and they're awesome. And then the second adaptation has been a really exciting process. So there's 3 artists: Howie Seago, Leslie Cross, and Christine Albright Tufts. They are collaboratively working on an adaptation of Titus Andronicus. And in this adaptation of Titus Andronicus, the Andronicus family are all deaf, and the Goths are all hearing. So in the beginning of the play, it's a world where the deaf and the hearing are interacting, and the world is sort of seamless. But as the Goths gain power, they diminish the resources for the Andronici, and they and if you're familiar with the play, you kind of track what happens to those characters and the immensity of loss that comes with Lavinia's loss of her hands, and so on and so forth. It's a fantastic fantastic job that they're doing. We're currently kind of exploring a few different production options for that, but it's beautiful and really heartbreaking to have worked on.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Sign?
Say it again?
It's in English and sign?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because that's a huge part of the adaptation, and part of is that anyone would be able to sit in the audience and understand what was happening. So the idea is that rather than having like sign interpreters at the front or having like superscripts up above for hearing audiences, it's integrated into the play so that whether you are deaf or hard of hearing or hearing, you understand because it's built into the show that way. It's a really sort of innovative process to get in and do that kind of work. And so we've been lucky to have the money to be able to actually support that kind of work, because it's a lot.
And Oregon Shakes in their history has done a lot in terms of having Hamlet's father be a deaf actor
Yes,
and Hamlet's son. So it's not unusual for you guys to try to integrate that. Other questions or comments?
I'm curious how a stage reading as opposed to a costume performance affected for the actors and for the whole production, things that were emphasized about the text, or things that they felt were more or less important, or how it generally influenced the whole performance to do a stage reading as opposed to, for instance, a costume production.
Actors? It's a lot less rehearsal.
You don't have to be memorized, and that's pretty cool. I'll say it.
It's harder to get embodied. You know, it's harder to find that physicality of your character. You let yourself off the hook easier, and you just don't have as much time to throw yourself physically into it. And the effect that has on your voice when you're doing, you know, if you're not physically engaged, I think changes it. So I think it's a kind of uphill battle to get physically engaged in a reading.
You did a great job, though. You were hilarious the whole time.
Actors, anything you want to say about your thoughts now, sort of dealing with the script and speaking it and all that? Any comments about how it worked for you, Rudy?
I think for someone not having no formal training in Shakespeare, it can be intimidating to approach the script or even seeing a production of it. So what I found, this adaptation, how do we phrase that? I found it very user-friendly in that respect. I read it like front to back, and I knew everything that was going on. And I don't know if you guys feel this way, but often with Shakespeare, you'll see characters on stage and be like, I have no idea who that is. I don't know why they're here. But this was very well constructed in a way that I was like, oh, okay, I get this. So that was great for me.
And the honoring of the verse was really impressive and important, because you write the verse so much and that you depend on that so much as an actor. So sometimes you see these translations or paraphrased versions, and this is not a paraphrase. This is honoring the verse, honoring the poetry, which I thought was impressive.
Having read this show and studied it in school like a half dozen times, there's so many little moments that even today I was finding out with the help of this translation. And when I first got the script in the email, just piggybacking off of your comment, I was able to read through the whole thing, and it was like, it just wasn't like I was reading Shakespeare anymore. It was way more clear. That I found the jokes were a lot more funnier and landed, like I was laughing out loud in my living room. It's great.
I will say about the jokes that I think one of the fun and tricky things about the process is how do you translate comedy, right? So is a strict, because in a way, like a strict translation of comedy isn't really a translation of comedy because it's not funny. Right. And so to translate comedy is to on some level translate the moment of landing a joke also, right? So a literal translation of some of the syphilis jokes in Shakespeare's Measure for Measure aren't as effective. So I think Aditi maybe had a bit stronger hand in playing with the comedy, and then certainly when for Pompey's speech, right, which was the real big break, right? She's like, okay, this is the one moment where he's like calling out the folks in the audience, and so that was where she took the most liberty and what people might say gets closer to what we might call an adaptation. But I think one of the really interesting things is in that, like, how do you translate comedy? Because if it's not funny, is that a translation? Or is it just a word by word sort of thing, but it's not getting at the performance moment, right? The way in which language hits an audience and creates a kind of response is a form of translation. And so that was just kind of a fun philosophical discussion that we had, and I think she therefore had a stronger hand in the comedy than she did in the rest of the verse.
Yeah, at risk of being that dude or that curmudgeon, I sincerely challenge the merits of the project, but I'll tell you, I do not challenge the merits of this execution. Aditi did a bang-up job, and so one of my experiences was coming in not, and still not believing in the project, but being so delighted with how she nailed it. So For me, that's a mixed effort. I could go on at length about my concerns, but I think she nails it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, let me say, and I want to hear a little bit more about your concerns, actually.
Sure.
Before our Cat on a Hot Tin Roof would say what was coming up next, and I would say that we were doing this measure to cleanliness, I had 3 or 4 times people either hiss or like give me like, what are you doing that for? I mean, just speak right out. And I was like, oh, please come, but you often in these you get people who are supportive rather than those people who are really worried, Sir, and then I want to get back to Rob. Yeah.
Following up on what you're just saying,
Yeah.
the bad reaction, you were describing this as a 3-year deal and how much effort is going into each individual play. So what was the purpose of all this? Why did Oregon Shakespeare start this huge project? And now that you've got these translations, what are you going to do with them?
Well, that's such a good question. And it's one that we're still exploring. But to start kind of back at the history, you did such a lovely job explaining at the top of the show, because it really was a big part of the impetus, is to say, when Shakespeare is translated into languages other than English, they're not translating it into 1600s French or 1600s Spanish. That's not the work that's being done. And so there's been this suspicion, from a lot of folks, that people hearing Shakespeare in other languages are having a more immediate experience of the story because they're hearing it in their contemporary language. And so the idea behind the project was to go, what if we could offer that experience in English? And so it was sort of an enormous experiment to see how that would go. In the beginning, I know that when it was first pitched at OSF, the first artistic director, Libby Apple, said, get out of my office. She was not at all interested. And then when it was pitched again 10 years later to Bill Rauch, who was the current and now outgoing artistic director of Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Louis likes to say that Louis is the director of the program, and she likes to say that Bill said, interesting. And when she was like, oh, no, that means we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And so Bill famously has a giant framed yes behind his desk. His secretary has a framed no behind him. They started, they didn't know what it was. They started by doing samples. They hired a famous translator named Kenneth Cavender, who's done a lot of work to sort of take samples from each play and see how it might work. And then they decided to apply it to a full length. So they're like, what can we do? They're like, I know, Timon of Athens. Nobody knows this play. People don't like this play. No one's going to be mad at us for messing with this play. So that was the first one that they did. And the workshops and readings, people were like, whoa, there's something here. There's actually something here. There was a lot of doubt in the beginning. And then Kenneth, the translator, had an ongoing relationship with the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. They read the script and they're like, we love it. And they ended up producing it. And it was their first time to ever complete the canon. And it was that production that completed their canon. So that was a wild deal. And on the way back, with the funders, the people who were interested in the program, they were like, this was exciting. This was different. This was something that we want to explore what we could get out of this. And Louis pitched and said, why don't we do them all? And why don't we do them all right now? Capture where language is right now. So that was the compressed time. And also she was like, I don't want to be 85 looking for someone to translate, the King Lear or something. So we did it in a compressed amount of time. And it's been really rewarding to kind of have this relationship with the plays. And so looking forward to where we want to do with them, we think there's a lot of different uses for them. We think it's really fun to see them in production. It's very different. They're always billed as translations by this playwright. We're never trying to say this is Shakespeare or trying to replace Shakespeare, which is a lot of the criticism we got in the beginning. But also as resources, fabulous resources for rehearsal process for a production. Actually getting to sit around the table as a group of actors, read this translation while you're doing table work, and then go back into the Shakespeare with the knowledge that you gain by kind of looking through it in this contemporary translation.
Could you share that there's a sort of an extraordinary structure to these playwrights? you talk about the diversity. When Louis first said this to me, I was like, are you kidding? Like, you're not only doing this, but you're gonna do.
So, sorry, what's...
How did the playwrights get picked? How about the diversity of the playwrights?
Oh, right, yeah, so the cohort of playwrights, the 36 playwrights that we brought on board, part of the mandate was that they be 51% women and 51% writers of color. So it's a very diverse group, and in fact, we realized we can't do 51% with 38 plays. So we'll add Edward III into the mix. So, Edward III is the most recent thing that we say might be in the canon. So we're like, yeah, we'll put it in there too. And yeah, that's been and also something that we've gotten criticism for as well. But it's been really exciting to get to see all these different voices in a world where exploration of these plays has been predominantly white and predominantly male. It has been really exciting to be at the table with something different.
Yeah. Yes, and then check.
Me?
Yes.
All right, cool. A question I have. So material like this has a lot of themes and motifs that relate to, the relevant times, everything that's happening right now. And since these new translations make everything so accessible for almost everybody, I'm like 18, I just got out of high school, and we watched the Kenneth Branagh version of Hamlet, and if I saw a translation like this, I would have loved it. Do you think there's any possibility of something like this going into classrooms and making it a little bit easier to tackle for students in high school that aren't particularly interested in something?
We definitely think there's educational uses. When I first, my mother has been dragged to see many Shakespeare productions. God bless her. And I remember when I was in college, I was in a production of Taming the Shrew, and she was coming to see it, and she was like, I just feel dumb. I just feel dumb when I watch these plays, and I don't like that. And it seems like everyone around me is understanding it and laughing. And I was like, oh no, they don't get it either. I promise. I promise. They get some of it, but you're not alone. And when I told her about this project, her response was, she was like, if I could see it in the translation, it might make me more open to going to see the Shakespeare afterwards. So that possibility of removing some of that, what we call Shakespeare, that people have, the just looking at the language and trying to get into it and saying, I can't, and it makes me feel dumb, so I'm gonna walk away. And so there is some hope that this project might get at that a little bit. We've also had great success working in classrooms, rather than saying, this is the translation, this is the definition of what this means. We acknowledge, this is one person's translation, this is one person's ideas. And so what we've done with students, there was a high school in Seattle that was kind of our pilot program for this. They read the translation, they read the original of Twelfth Night, and then their work in their Shakespeare class, they're in a high school with a Shakespeare class, fabulous. They, over the course of the semester, they were divided into 5 small groups, and each group got an act, and they created their own translation. And so the relationship that they then had with the text and with the story, the arguments that they were getting into about character and motivation and subtext, it was remarkable in a way that usually when you're in a high school setting with Shakespeare, the conversation is, what does this mean? I don't understand this, help me understand this, teacher. And the teacher says, this is what this means. One of the students was actually, after taking that class, was telling us that he was in senior English when they taught Hamlet, and that his teacher of that class was like, this is what this means. This is how this is supposed to go. And he raised his hand, he was like, I don't think that's true. I think it could be something different. And she was like, no, this is what it is. And he was like, actually, we learned in this class that there's many interpretations to these things. And so that was just so exciting to hear, because those lessons are the kinds of lessons that we want out there.
Well, has anybody talked about doing film on any of this?
Oh gosh. I don't think we haven't left quite that far at the moment, but we are seeing more and more production interest from different theaters. A lot of times what theaters are wanting to do is to pair the plays with a Shakespeare. So they'll say, you're gonna see for one theater did a production of translation of Pericles in rep with Shakespeare's Tempest. And so you were getting to kind of get into both languages. And it was the same acting company who were in both plays. So they were kind of existing in both worlds. But yeah, so that's kind of, yeah.
I know you're here, Shannon, but I want to, Rob, just share a little bit your concern.
Sure. Well, so I think there's a species of the kind of soft bigotry of low expectations that's available, that there's something aspirational about the complexity of language that we have distance from, and that having the bar set there is quite lovely. But it's all, the project also, I think, risks, at least. And I must, having loved this experience, be available to let experience confound my ideas. So it may be better than I expect, but I think that it's either too little or too much. I'm not a purist. I celebrate the American Shakespeare Center's Shakespeare's New Contemporaries project, which is all adaptations, which explodes the ideas of the plays and says, really take these as beginning points. Or the Rune Mechanicals here in town, they're fixing series. So I like projects that have that exploratory openness. This feels like it's neither maintaining the meaning. With Shakespeare isn't really about the literal meaning. At least it's only partly about the literal meaning. It's that aesthetic meaning. And we denude the work of the aesthetic meaning, and so we have only its literal meaning. So it feels either too little or too much to me. And that seems, but I love funding playwrights, so that's awesome. And I love funding diverse playwrights, and I'm intrigued by the idea of it as a primer to make you more ready to engage with it. But I feel like, to your point, that multiple interpretations are available, not because we're remote from the language, but because Shakespeare writes each sentence, sometimes each word, is a multifaceted jewel with ambiguity packed into it. And the minute we interpret it into one modern translation is the meaning we've lost the 24 other surfaces of that original jewel. That said, this execution is solid, and some of it also had multifaceted jewels.
Right.
So my experiences to some degree are confounding my ideas about it, and if I'm intellectually honest, I need to come back to more of them and look for more cracks in my logic. So those are my concerns, and also where I have concerns about my concerns.
I think given the history of works similar to this, your concerns are so well founded. There's so much out there. People compare this. In the beginning, people were comparing what we were doing to No Fear Shakespeare,
right? I knew that was coming.
Which is not a flattering comparison, to say the least. And it's interesting because I think the experience that you're talking about is such a similar experience to what we're hearing from so many people. The biggest detractors that we've had the whole time have been actors, because this is their art. This is what they do. Their job is to interpret the text. And so there was this sense in the beginning of, you're taking this away from us. You're taking away our job. This is our job. And so to get into the room and to get into these workshops, we had people, there's an actor in New York, I actually can't say his name because part of his agreement to participate in the project was that no one would know he participated in the project. That was how intense it was in the beginning. He came in and said, Louis, you don't really need me in the room. I'm a classically trained actor. I'm a Shakespearean actor. You don't need me. This is because that's not what you're doing. And then at the end of the process, he said, look, I don't necessarily like it. You haven't necessarily changed my mind, but I was wrong because I needed every bit of the skills that I needed to approach Shakespeare to approach this text, because it's still complex language. It's still these thoughts that run on for line after line after line after line that you have to parse and you have to find the breath to get through. And so that is satisfying for me, right? It's like, I don't want to change everybody's mind, and I would not necessarily enjoy being attached to a project that everybody loved.
How did you assign the play to those playwrights? How did you match them up with the best
Like, how did Aditi get Measure for Measure? Why not someone else?
Well, a lot of it had to do with first come, first serve. And a lot of the selection of playwrights was, Louis likes to say that a lot of them were FOLs, or friends of Louis.
There's a lot of new plays being read all the time
Yes.
at Oregon Shakespeare.
Yeah, and that's
New
what,
playwrights
she had
do.
spent 26 years at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival running like the new play development part of their work. And so her familiarity with the field was
She
very
really
wide.
curated it.
And so another diversity that we don't talk about amongst this group as much that I think we should is also diversity of experience and age and point of their career, because we have a lot of people who, like Kenneth, is like, is in his older years, and he's
the man.
Yes, and then we have people who are from out of the Yale School of Drama's playwriting, like master's program, who are tackling plays as well. So that, I think, has also been incredibly exciting. But this question comes up a lot, and unfortunately the answer is not too satisfying, because it wasn't an entirely scientific process. It was a lot of, some like, we think this might work well for you, and then the playwright saying, yeah, I don't want to do that, I want this one. And so we kind of whittled it down until we were at the very end. And the final two plays to go, the plays that nobody wanted, were Two Gentlemen of Verona.
Oh, wow.
And the very last play to go was Romeo and Juliet.
Wow.
Because everyone was scared to death of it.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. But Hansel Jung, who's done the translation of Romeo and Juliet, has done a beautiful job. And it's raunchy as hell, too, which that play is. But yeah, so it was kind of a mix of a process, and it was a wild first few weeks. That was kind of my first job, was like corralling all of this.
And will there be a book? Each playwright still has their own rights, their own play, right?
Yes, so that's a big part of this commission too, is that the rights belong entirely to the playwright. And so one thing I like to mention in terms of like addressing the fear of these plays replacing Shakespeare or attempting to, is that these are actually the translations belong to the playwrights, and if theaters want to do them, they got to pay royalties to the playwrights. And so because Shakespeare's in the public domain, and that's typically a free venture for theaters to get to do, we think that Shakespeare's going to be around a little bit longer because the nonprofits.
I just looked at my time, and I know that we have to leave at 11.
Yes.
But can we just have some quick, Chuck and finish?
Oh, no, I'm good.
You're good. Okay.
One quick,
Oh.
gotta ask.
I don't know if anybody's aware. An interesting adaptation/translation that's come out of Measure for Measure. Josie Rauch's done at the Donmar just recently. And the first act is pretty much just editing. And the second act is all adapted. The first act is 1604, second half, or half of it, and the second half is 2018. And Isabella and the deputy switch. The actor that plays Isabella and the actor that plays the deputy. Right, the sexes change as they go from 1604 to 2018.
Interesting.
Cool. Okay, so we have to go to London and see the Thank you so much for staying.
Thank you, Fire Raffle ticket.